Hi, my name is Javier Albornoz, and today we'll be talking about the setup and user interface in Adobe Audition. Adobe Audition is a wave editor and multi-track editor. We can use it to edit single audio files, such as WAV files or .aiff or .mp3 or any other audio file format, but it also allows you to edit multi-track so you can mix multiple audio files at once. When Adobe Audition finishes loading, we're presented with these windows you see on the screen. If you're familiar with other Adobe software, particularly Adobe Premiere Pro, a lot of this will look familiar to you, and the buttons, layout, the way that you navigate through the user interface, they'll be pretty familiar to you. First, here on your left, you can see Files, Favorites. Under Files, here in this box are listed files that you have loaded in your session, which currently we don't have any, so it's blank. But if you look below, we do have our media browser where we can go ahead and load files. So let's take a file here from the hard drive of my computer and drop it into our window. So we have a single mono audio file, and as you can see here, now it appears in our list of files. When we click on the file, you can see here, if we scroll, we can see various properties of this file, including duration, it's a bit over 20 seconds, sample rate of 48,000 hertz. It is mono, so it's a single channel file, and its bit depth is 24 bits. And you can see here media type, location, frame rate doesn't apply in this case, but you've got a lot of different information here. So we scroll back, we can see our file name, selected file. Down here, this play or loop, this is where you can audition the audio file that you have loaded rather than just simply playing it from your timeline. So if you have several audio files loaded here, you can audition each, loop the playback, have them autoplay when you click. So if we continue down here and we click on this next tab, Effects Rack, what you're going to see here is your insert effects that you can load that would apply to this audio file. So if we click the drop down, we're going to see various audio effects that live within Adobe Audition, and also VST, VST3, and audio unit plugins that you might have loaded on your computer. If we look down here on the bottom left, we have our history, so we can see our undo history. In this case, we've only completed one action. And if we were to load a video file, this is where we would see that as well. Down here on the very bottom of the screen, you've got your level meter. So if we were to play back our audio file, I'll click up here on the timeline and press play.
The purpose of this virtual reality.
You can see that our level meter jumps and gives us a value as the file plays. Our transport bar here is where you can hit play, but of course the space bar will also play the file. So if we look up above our audio file, we do have our timeline, much like in video editing software. In this case, as we see here in our duration, this audio file is about 20 seconds long, so our timeline reflects that. Now, on the y-axis, you do have in decibels the volume of the audio file. So you can see that the highest peak in this particular audio file lives somewhere in the 13 decibel range, more or less, we can see here. Now, if you look higher up, you can see that you get an overview of the audio file you have loaded. While if we click the tab here that says Mixer, we don't see anything currently because we are not in multi-track. we are only in the waveform editor. So let's go back here. You can see here what I just mentioned. We do have waveform versus multitrack. Now what that means, when we're in waveform, we are just viewing and editing this single audio file. And even if we have multiple files loaded here, if I go to my media browser and bring in another file, we do only see one file at a time. If I double click this next audio file, we can audition it, and we'll also view it in our waveform editor here. Now, if we do want to work in a multi-track setting and we click multi-track, this dialog window pops up with various settings. Let's take a minute to see what some of these options are. .wav files are the standard that we use when working with digital audio. .mp3 files are compressed, while .wav or sometimes .aiff are high-fidelity, full-bandwidth audio files. Sample rate is related to frequency or pitch and is measured in hertz or kilohertz. Bit depth is related to dynamic range or volume. The standard when working with audio for any kind of visual media is 48 kilohertz or 48,000 hertz and 24 bits for the bit depth. For number of channels, mono means that we are working with one single audio channel, while stereo refers to two audio channels, which are usually panned left and right. 5.1 surround includes 6 audio channels, being the front left speaker, front right, center speaker, where dialogue usually lives, rear left, rear right, and the LFE, or low frequency effects channel. So after we've named our file, chosen our location, chosen sample rate, 48,000 hertz, bit depth to 24 bits, and stereo, we can click OK, and we will see our multi-track editor in Audition. So now you can see that rather than having the single waveform editor, we have our timeline up here and multiple tracks going along our y-axis. So rather than being able to load only one file at a time, we can now drop in several audio files either on the same track, end to end, placed along each other so that they crossfade, or on separate tracks so that they do play at the same time. As well as that, we do have various options related to controlling our volume levels, and that's where now if we do click Mixer, we have our mixer for our several audio tracks, and it does look very similar to the mixer setup that you would see in Premiere Pro. If we click back here to our editor, it brings our back to our edit window, where if we wanted to, we have the ability to add more tracks, work with our master that controls the sum of all of these tracks, or continue editing as you see here. If you select at the end of a file, you do have this trim tool, which again looks very similar to anybody who would be familiar with editing in Premiere Pro. We can move the file back. We do have our keyframe line here, as you can see in the middle, where we can automate volume, and several other options, including fade out here in this gradient sort of box at the end, as well as fade in here at the start of the file. And you can see here that as you select the crossfade button here, when you move your mouse cursor up and down, it does change the angle or the parabola that you see here, the shape of the fade, whether it's completely linear or slightly curved or sinusoidal. So you do have a lot of options very conveniently placed right on the clip. Now, if you click here on these different tabs, we are going to see the options within each track to apply effects, similar to applying effects here. If we click back to our waveform editor and we go to our effects rack, where we can load effects on this audio file, the single audio file in our waveform editor. But we might want to do that within our multi-track editor and apply individual effects to each of these files. So that's a great way to start working in a multi-track setting rather than in single tracks. Now again, if you're familiar with Premiere Pro or any other Adobe software, you'll notice that up here you have several layout shortcuts that are convenient for different tasks that will bring up different window setups for you. And again, you also have a few of them conveniently posted here, but you can click default and go right back to this default view. And if you were to click here on window, you do always have your full list of different windows, and you can customize your setup so that you can view your window layout as you feel comfortable. If you look up here at the top of the Adobe Audition window, you'll see that you have your toolbar where you might see some familiar tools from Adobe Premiere Pro. Now, the current tool we have selected is our Move tool, which is how we've been able to grab the audio files and move them along our timeline. But next to that, you have the Razor tool, which is how you can cut your audio. And in this case, we are cutting this extra silence at the end of our audio files so that we can select and delete individual sections. If I move this over here and solo that track, you'll hear that now the narration starts more or less right when the speaker began to record.
The purpose of this virtual reality experience.
So the tool that you have next to that is called the Slip tool. And this is a very interesting and useful tool because rather than selecting your audio file and moving the actual event, what you're doing here is actually moving the data that is in this file and causing it to slip along the actual audio clip that's in your timeline. So you can see here that as I scroll to the left and to the right, we're moving along our timeline, but the clip size stays the same. The audio material is being moved. So rather than using the Razor tool and cutting, I'm actually just moving this audio in this specific track right to the start of the timeline. I'll go back to my Move tool and I will solo that track. And you can hear now that if I play back my timeline right from the start,
The Museum of
we've
Tomorrow.
got that crossfade in there and the file starts to play back. I hope you've enjoyed this introduction into using Adobe Audition and navigating the setup of new files and the user interface.